Create our project. So we just type in the name of the project. I'm going to call it CherriesSplash. And I'm going to put it in my folder here where it says location. I'm just going to find my D drive. And put it into my work folder. Okay? So your project should be named something like CherriesSplash. And then your location should be your D drive, whatever, whatever, whatever. Okay? The first thing we need to do is we need to import the geometry. So we go up to Import, and we go to Object, and we just find that cherries. Doesn't matter where it's at. I'm just going to grab it off of my desktop. Okay, so I just imported the cherries, so now we have cherries in the scene, and then we're going to do the same thing we've done before, which is throw them. Okay, just like we threw the ball, we're going to throw the cherries. So I'm going to move this up and over. I'm going to make it active, and then I'm going to go down to where it says, it's weird how they label this, but it says at velocity, and that's where we do the initial velocities. Okay, so we just want to throw this, so we're going to take the velocity in the X direction, in my case, and make it, let's say, 30, and in the Y direction, 30. Okay. We're going to have to do a little bit of timing and movement around to get it to so it goes right through the middle of the splash. Okay, so you don't have to hit it because you can just watch mine. But when I hit A to do my simulation, you'll see that it just goes. Okay, and it's going forever. Why?
We have no gravity.
Correct. We have no gravity in the scene. There's nothing pulling it down. So I'm going to reset it, and then I'm just going to go under my demons or daemons, whatever you call them, and just add some gravity. Okay, and then if I hit A again, you'll see that he goes flying, and then eventually he'll wield itself and start to fall down. Eventually. Okay, so 30 might have been a little bit too aggressive. I'm going to lower it to maybe 10 and 10. Okay, find just some numbers that are right for you that kind of keep it in the relative ballpark of that origin area. So now that we have these things kind of moving in this arc fashion, we have just kind of like a relative idea of where we want our stuff to happen. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to create our fluid. Now we could just create an emitter and just shoot it out, but what happens is it doesn't look realistic. Okay, it's kind of like a water hose shooting out as opposed to nice flowing water coming out. So what we're going to do is a bank shot. We're going to take a cup like this, and I'm going to do it upside down. So imagine that this side is open, and we're going to shoot water into it like this, so it kind of collects and then pours out the cup. Okay, so we're going to go under the geometry tab, and we're just going to create a vase. And a vase is just an open cylinder with kind of like that cup shape. So I'm just going to kind of position this in a way that, you know, I'd want this thing to be pouring out. Okay, all of this is editable. Don't think we have to get it all in one shot, okay? Just kind of get it roughly placed where you want that to happen. Once we have it placed there, then we can go under the liquid particles. Okay, we're not doing hybrido in this one. We're going to do the liquid particles. And we're going to create an emitter. All of these are emitters. We're going to use the circle one. That's typically the one we always use. So just click circle, and we're going to move it into the cup. And you'll see that there's a little arrow attached to the circle. That's the direction it's shooting out. So like I said, we want to point it into the cup so it kind of shoots into the cup, collects a little bit, and then starts to pour out. So I'm just going to rotate it and reposition it so it's in the cup like that. Okay. So if we went into wireframe, which is 8, I could see this thing shooting into the cup. And then from there, we can simulate and see what happens. If you look at how many particles we have, we only have 7,316 particles in the scene. That's not a whole lot of particles, considering that real flow will do millions of particles without skipping. Well, it'll skip a little bit, but not much. Okay. So what we're going to do is reset it, and for the time being, we're going to grab the cherries, scroll up to where it says simulation active, and we're just going to make it inactive. And then when we hit play, you'll see how much faster that the fluid sim is going to simulate. Okay, so now that we have this simulating, then we can customize what it's going to look like. Okay, we're aiming our path for what we want that stream to look like. In my case, I can see the angle that it's coming off here. I can see that this is looking kind of like wholly in the middle, and I don't want it wholly in the middle. I want a nice strip right there. I want it to look like a big flat area of liquid. Some of that might be just waiting. Okay. So if I waited a little bit longer and had, you know, more particles coming down, that might fill that area in. But I can try other stuff too. If I reset this and I change the position of my locate or my emitter, maybe I just make this emitter go up first, and maybe even like shoot at one of the walls. I can change the path of what particles are coming out. I can change what they look like. Okay, and you can see just by doing this that I'm getting more of that stream. I'm getting more of that like thicker area right in the center just by doing a little bank shot off the top wall of this. It's not even really a bank shot, it's just kind of like shooting up a little bit and then gliding down. Okay, so position your cup so that it fills it in a little bit better. You could also take the cup, oops, let me stop this, and you can stretch out the cup both directions. You could change the rotation of the cup, and all of these things will influence what that end path is going to look like. Okay, we're never going to see the cup. This is simply for us to get the particles to lay correctly. All right, so take a couple seconds just to kind of play with that and see. Here's that resolution I was talking about. If you have too many particles, you can lower the resolution, and that'll lessen the amount of particles coming out. You could also lessen the density. We could also come down to the speed and lessen the speed. Okay, for now, everything's good. All right, our goal is just to kind of set up the stage as quick as possible. All right, save your scene if you haven't saved it. Just Control S. Now, I did this one thing. I cleared my timeline here. I didn't want to clear it yet, okay, because I wanted to show something before I cleared it. So instead of me having to go through and simulate it, this other button right here, this battery indicator button, will reload your time slider. So if I just click that, it'll reload it from the cache. So even though I've disabled it or reset it, it's still there, okay? So what I want to show is that with this, our previous cherry animation, the cherries are already gone. By the time this liquid hits there, the cherries have already passed it. The cherries would have been, at frame 90, they'd be like over down here in the ground. So what we have to do is delay the cherries flying into the liquid until, I'm going to guess about frame 80 in this case. Okay, so you can see at about frame 80 would be a good time to start the cherries going towards it. Then at about frame 90 or 100, they'll actually like splash through the liquid. Okay, so what we're going to do is grab the cherries, and we're going to set some keyframes up here in the simulation. So we're going to go to frame, in mine, use your own numbers. Okay, you can't use my numbers because yours might be different. I'm going to go to frame 81. I'm going to right click on simulation and add a key. I'm going to go to frame 82. I'm going to change this to active, and then I'm going to set another key. Then what should happen, if I reset this, is that nothing, 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 the cherries are staying there. Eventually, when we get to frame 81, it swaps, and then the cherries will then launch themselves towards the liquid. Frame 90 or 100-ish, the cherries splash through the liquid, and then we can see what kind of interaction we have, and then we can go back and tweak those settings. Okay? So we still have all that initial stuff. We're just delaying it by keyframing this simulation of the cherries. There they go. Okay, you can see them kind of flying through. Now it's boring so far because the cherries are just like perfectly flat going like this. If they're flying through the air, there'd be a little bit of lean back, and that's eventually what I want to do, is have them kind of roll and spin as they go. So now they're going to hit through. Okay, I'm going to escape it right there just so I can go in here and see and verify. Maybe the cherries need to become, a little bit smaller. They might be just a little bit too big. So I can obviously scale those down, no problem. And then I'm just going to watch that animation and just see what happens. Okay, so get to this part where you have your cherries flying through the system. All right, so if we look now, you can see my liquid's coming through, and then the cherries kind of splash through them and do a little bit of a flip. Okay, so now we're at that point of then going through and just tweaking a bunch of stuff to get it to look the way we want it to look. Now as we watch this and we see, first of all, as I rewind it, you see the cherries kind of stay in the middle of my screen. Because they're set to inactive at the beginning, they just kind of hang out in the middle. When we do our actual simulation, they will reset to the other side. Okay, so right here, boom, they stop there. Okay, and if I went here and then rewound this, you can see that they stay there. It's just because I jumped back. All right, so I'm going to watch this, and as they go through, like we said, number one, it's just kind of boring how the cherries are perfectly lined up going through this thing. I want them to come in there and kind of do a little bit of a turn, and even this way, kind of turning that way a little bit too. I also, I'm not sure if I like how they're hitting this and falling down like that. I mean, it's not terribly bad, but I think once we add that rotation in there, that will help. I can also assess whether I'm liking the amount of splash I'm getting off of these. If I decide it's too much splash or too little splash, what should I do to change that? What property could adjust how much influence the cherries going through this would have effect on that?
The velocity of the cherries.
The velocity of the cherries, what else could it be?
Density of the water.
The density of the water. There's one more big one.
The position?
Nope. The mass. Okay? If we have a big heavy object flying through it or a really light object flying through it, that's going to really influence how the cherries interact with it. Okay? There's also some other ones. There's resilience or bounciness. There's friction that can play a part in that. So all of these things we can adjust. Okay? Now the liquid itself, if I come in here, has it has viscosity here, which we could adjust. That's the thickness of the particles. We also have some pressures that we could adjust. And then obviously, like we said, the density, if there's more particles there, more particles are going to interact differently with this object. Okay? But a lot of this is going to come from the cherries themselves. Going in here and adjusting the particle friction. So if I grab the cherries and adjust my particle friction a little bit, because it's water, I have to kind of consider how much friction is there going to be if this is water. So I probably wouldn't like take this up to 10, but maybe 0.01 would allow a little bit more friction there. Here's my bounce. I probably don't want it to bounce because what's happening is the particles hit it, or the cherries hit it, and the particles just fly off of it. Okay? So maybe lower, not off, but lower, because I do want some spray. I want them to come through and have a little bit of mist coming off there. And then here's the big one, which is our mass. Our mass is set to 575. In playing with this, I took the mass down to 10 to see what would happen. And what happens is the cherries come up and they hit and then they fall. Okay? So there's where we can play that game. Because I was getting that they were hitting it and it was basically exploding. Okay? So we have to play with these values. Tim's scene's going to be different than Kwane's, going to be different than Steven's. Everyone's scene's going to be different. So we have to know these little spots to edit. So I can edit this as well. I can say, maybe my mass needs to be lower by, say 300. Okay? So I'm going to lower this to 300. And I don't have to replay the entire sim. All I have to do is go to right before they hit and then hit A. and then let them go through and sim. Now there is a little bit of difference because the mass has changed. The speed that they're moving is going to be a little bit different, and their force is going to be a little bit different, but it'll give me an idea of what's going to happen. Okay? So I like the way that looks. I'm going to keep that. I'm also going to go back. Come on, rewind it to there, whatever. And I'm going to take the cherry rotation, and I'm just going to add a little bit of rotation in X and a little bit of rotation in Y. And then just reset and simulate again. So far it looks lovely. No complaints. There could be more tweaking done to this, obviously. I would actually like to probably have a little bit more time here before they actually start to fling themselves into that particle. Thinking about how this animation would play out is typically you have a camera kind of like that, and you have your fruit fly through it. I need to have a couple frames beforehand and a couple frames after that that work. So the couple frames beforehand, you can see they're kind of broken a little bit. All right, so I may need a little bit more leeway there. That's no big deal. Okay, just like in Maya, we have a graph editor, so I could. You don't need to do this. I could right-click and say Open Curve, and here are my keyframes that I could adjust. So I could just move these keyframes over. And it's not like Maya in the fact that Maya is easy to use, the graph editor. This one is a lot more difficult to use. 85. Oops. You can see I'm trying to highlight this, and it keeps unhighlighting it. There we go. Okay. So now I've just adjusted that a little bit. That's no big deal. Okay. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pretend that this is cool. I love the way this looks, and I want to take it to the next stage. Okay. My next stage would be to render or to run a higher res sim. Okay. Right now I'm at frame 200, and I'm at about 19,000 particles. For my next stage, I want to be at 100,000 particles at least. Okay. So obviously this is going to take a lot longer to simulate, but it'll be a lot more accurate, a lot closer to what the end result would be. So if I reset this, and I go to my circle, and I go to my resolution, and I just bump this up. Okay. Now before I bump it up, oops, wrong button. Before I bump it up, wrong button again. Put it back to 1. There we go. Okay, I'm going to simulate this, and I'm just going to see at frame 20. There we go. At frame 20, I'm at 2,000 particles. Okay, so I can roughly estimate that I'm getting about, I don't know what that would be, 100 particles a frame, roughly 100 particles a frame. Okay, so if I take this up to 20, I should be getting 2,000 particles a frame in my mind. Okay, I'm at frame 5, and I have about 10,000 particles. So that seems pretty accurate. So if I know that by the time this thing hits about frame 80, 80 times, I lost my brain, 2,000 would be 160,000, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to also come down to this max particles, and I can set my maximum number of particles. And I'm going to set this to 200,000. Okay? Because in my animation, by the time this thing starts pouring out, my cherries fly through it, I don't need the rest of those particles that are just sitting up there just wasting space. Okay? So I'm going to reset again. I'm going to save, because we want to save often. And then I'm going to let this play, and then I'm going to see what happens with this one. Okay? This one's going to take a lot longer. It might take 10 minutes for this one. Okay?
When it hits 200K, does it stop emitting?
When it hits what? 200,000? Yeah, it stops emitting. So it will stop emitting if we have one of the things we haven't covered yet are kill demons. And what they do is if a particle gets out of bounds, like let's say a particle explodes and flies off into space, we can kill that one off. Okay? So if we kill enough off, it'll start emitting more.
So
okay?
We put in a kill plane underneath it?
Right, we could put in a kill plane underneath it, and it'll still calculate more of those particles. Okay? For how short this is, I don't think we need it, but we could add that, definitely. And just for fun, let's do that. I'm going to go to Demons, and I'm going to add a kill plane. All right, kill volume. And I'm just going to scale this up. Oops, not scale it up, sorry. I'm going to scale it this way up. Okay, and what this is going to do is all the particles are going to be alive within this field. Okay, so that's the only spot that these particles are going to be alive in. Once they get out of here, they're dead. They're nothing to me. Alright, and just to verify it, I'll hit A, and I need to inverse it. Inverse. Nope. Where do they go? Inverse? No. There they go. Alright, so now I'm going to let them continue to emit. They're going to come down here, the cherries are going to go through, and anything that exits this box is just going to be a dead particle. So what I'm going to do is at this stage, let's pretend that this goes through. It's an hour later, and I've simmed out this whole thing, and it looks cool, okay? Once we like the simulation, we like the way the particles are going, then it's time to actually put a mesh to it, okay? So right now, these are just particles. These are just little dots representing how this fluid is interacting. So under the Mesh tab, we would click on the far left particle mesh once we have the circle clicked, and then we would be able to get a mesh. It's not going to display right away because just like the particles, the mesh has to calculate every single frame. So what we can do is turn on the mesh calculator right here, and then it'll go through 6 hours later. It'll calculate what the mesh is supposed to look like. It'd be impressive if one time I actually did that and it worked. And I hit 0 so I can see it, and then you can see the mesh. Okay? So what it's doing is just like our Bifrost, it's taking all the little dot particles and creating this particle on top of, or this polygon on top of it. Okay? Unlike Bifrost, we have a bunch of options that we can play with in a much quicker fashion. One of them is these filters. So I'm going to grab my particle mesh and take this filter on. And I'm also going to go to my circle. Okay? I have two circles now. One of the circles is up here. That's the emission. This circle that's inside the mesh is how that particle is becoming a mesh. Okay? So if I click on that, I get more options. I'm going to just take my radius down to 0.04 and let this thing calculate, and you'll see that I get something that resembles something more like a liquid. Okay? As opposed to that big blobby mess that I was looking at before. Now it's still not at that stage of being able to render this out. This is way too thin and stringy. We would need to render out 1 million particles for this thing to fill in totally. Okay? And it may even be, I can see that this thing is kind of flaring out at the end. I may even have to drop in a couple planes up top just to kind of redirect or kind of flatten out this pipe so it doesn't expand so much. Okay, so once I'm happy with that, I'll just show you real quick how you can kind of get some test renderings of this. Under the display, there's this fire thing, and you can just click the fire thing, and there's a rendering of it. You don't have to do any setups. You don't have to add any lights. It's just there's the rendering. This is using Maxwell renderer. So what happens is that it goes through and it does like a really rough sampling, a higher end sampling. So as we're going, it's still rendering. Okay, even though it might look nice, it's still going through this whole rendering phase. With this kind of renderer, you never specify like I want this to look, you know, quality of 2 and all this stuff. You literally set a time. I want each frame to take 600 milliseconds or 600 seconds, and it goes through and sets that as each frame how long it's going to take to calculate. So you can basically kind of time your stuff out and say I have 6 hours, 200 frames, how long can each frame take to render? It may not be pretty, but it'll do that. Okay. We can also come down here on any of these objects and go to where it says shader, and we can pick a different kind of shader, or we can go to material and choose what kind of material. So if I chose water pure, which is this water, and I grab these guys, which are the cherries, they don't have a cherries material down here, so I'm just going to come up to my color and just choose something in the red section, and then hit fire again, and then we'll see our pure water Wonderful. And we'll see our red cherries. Okay? So that's going to be the process for just creating this whole thing inside of RealFlow. All right? I'm not going to go over the exporting stuff today. I'll save that for next time. We'll go over just how we can take this stuff out of here. So I want you to play with this. I want you to get a cool little rendering of this, of your stuff going through. If you need to, you have plenty of other computers in the room. So while this one's simming, you could work on something else on the one next to you. Or if you wanted to, have 3 computers set up to sim the same thing and see which one turns out best. Yeah, okay. So I'm just going to save. At any point, I can disable. Right now, my mesh is set to build. So if I'm going back to the tweaking phase, I can turn my mesh off so it doesn't build at every frame. That way it goes quicker. And then I could reset and just go through that whole process of simming it out, making sure it looks good. Okay? So before next week, I would like you to have this thing ready to go. If you didn't get a chance to do the other one, you're not rendering anything out for it. But I do want you to at least have gone through that last one of breaking it so you understand the rigid body stuff. Okay? Also, like I said, I have the NHair stuff up on the server. This one is using NHair server.